Truth.
Welcome back to Engage in Truth. This is Steve Ford, your co-host, along with Pastor John Bornschein, Senior Pastor at Calvary Fellowship Fountain Valley, located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Thank you so much for joining us again today. As you will recall, largely due to world events and our desire to provide you with a biblical perspective, we have been in a holding pattern in Daniel chapter 7. Now, interestingly, in this chapter, Daniel is the one who has a dream that needs to be interpreted. So let's open our Bibles and see what God has to teach us today as we continue our journey through Daniel chapter 7. Now remember, you can find prior episodes of this series, along with prior episodes of this broadcast, archived on the church's website at calvaryfountain.com. That's calvaryfountain.com. And here's Pastor John to get us started.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ford. Indeed, we have had to delay the initial progression through Daniel 7 as we had intended, and it seems that we have to keep going through this a time or two because the world is really unfolding before our eyes with some prophetic implications. Things going on in the Middle East that have required us to take a little more time to go through that, to examine it a little more closely. And ironically, where we were in Daniel chapter 7, we were talking about the rise of the Antichrist. It doesn't mean that any of the world players on the scene at the moment are that person. We have obviously talked about the various views of when the Antichrist will be revealed. It's my perspective that in Revelation chapter 6, with a white horse rider going forth, that this is a imitation of the true white horse rider, Jesus Christ, who is revealed in Revelation 19, who comes back in a glorious fashion with all of the saints with him as he pierces the sky and returns to the Mount of Olives, cracking it in two and coming through victoriously to take his rightful throne on the earth, which will bring forth the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. What we find quite consistently throughout Scripture is that Satan clones, distorts, twists, and deceives. And so he wants to be the white horse rider. And so the one that goes out in Revelation 6 goes out under the guise of peace, but is a conqueror. He is unleashed on the world. And what Paul revealed to the church in Thessalonica is that the sequence of events appears to be such that when he is revealed, it is after the restrainer has been removed. And with this, the harpazo, the rapture of the church of Jesus Christ, and then a 7-year Shemitah, the final judgment cycle begins, and that begins with this release of this Antichrist figure who will clamor for power. The dragon will empower him, and ultimately as people become more religious, not Christian or faithful to the Lord, but religious, they will worship this Antichrist figure. And not all the world. We'll get to that in Daniel chapter 11. There's going to be some who come against him, who attempt to rise up against him in his claim for power. And ultimately, this will all ensue into the Battle of Armageddon. And there we see that the Lord will crush these armies. And at some point in this, Ezekiel 38 has to happen. Now, some believe that Ezekiel 38 happens prior to, and that because of the sequence of events for the cleanup operation from Ezekiel 38, in which there's the hook and the jowls that comes from Rosh coming down to Israel, along with an allied group of forces that have created this conglomerate of nations that come against Israel that includes Turkey and Persia, the very Persia that's making headlines right now, the one that we're engaged with a war with, right? That we are in war conflict right now with Persia. And we talked about that last week of Elam and the Elamites. And then, of course, we'll see southern nations that also come into this joint effort to destroy Israel, and God himself will destroy them at the Golan Heights and bring himself glory through it. Now, that most likely happens at the beginning of that 7-year finale because Israel will think themselves to be at peace. There'll be a person that's needed to then broker peace with Israel, and then this sets the stage for this one who, under the guise of peace, allows them to rebuild their temple. And there's a lot of discussion right now about rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. That seems to be really the definitive factor that when this one who brokers peace with Israel gives them the illusion that peace will be for 7 years, he'll break that 3.5 years in, right about the time when the temple is finished. And then he'll go into that temple, desecrate it, call himself to be God on earth, and then wars and calamities unlike the world has ever seen, even outside the flood itself, will ensue. That period of time is called the Great Tribulation. So let's back up for just a moment. Some of you, it's been a couple weeks now as we look at Daniel chapter 7. The scene is this, that Daniel is given this dream. It says here in verse 1 that Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. And then he writes the following. He says that he saw this vision of a first beast that comes on the earth. It's like a lion, and it had eagle's wings, and he watches as the wings are plucked from it, and then this creature is lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a heart is given to it. We talked about how that was the image of most likely the Babylonian Empire and Nebuchadnezzar himself. But as we know, with demonic warfare and demons rising up and using men in their schemings and plannings, and of course all of that is under God's holy jurisdictional authority. No demon operates outside of that. They are still under the rule and reign of our God and Father. And Yahweh is his name, by the way. And he rules over all the affairs of men. And so even as demons clamor against each other, and the prince of Persia rises up against the prince of Greece, that these forces are still under the sovereign reign of God until he is appointed, at all things point to Jesus Christ and his ultimate rule and reign. So it's possible that the force behind this kingdom was also representative in other kingdoms. And we talked about that. What other kingdoms could also be represented in that? We then looked at the second image that was given to Daniel of a bear, and raised up on one side, had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And we then looked at, the correlations between an empire of old, the Medes and the Persians, but is it possible that same demonic force is active in other nations today? Is it still within Persia today? Is it also up in Russia and Rosh, Gog of Magog? And then we also looked at the third one because there was another image of another beast that comes on the scene like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So we talked about what that could represent. Certainly the Greeks and the various, how it fractured the nation of Greece, that as it took over through Alexander the Great, all of the known world and all of those regions were then fractured after Alexander the Great's death. And all of that seems to correlate nicely, fits nicely into a historical context. But what does it mean looking forward? Does that nation also bear a striking resemblance to other nations today, such as, or this beast rather, an image of nations today, perhaps of Germany and France and others that could be symbolized within that image? And then also we see this final beast that Daniel is given an image of this fourth beast that's dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong, has huge iron teeth, and is devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. And on it, we find that there's this pompous horn that emerges. It talks about the horns, and horns are always symbols of power. And this horn represents a final ruler who speaks pompous words. And that's where we started to examine a little closer this emergence of a final ruler, a world ruler likened to Nimrod of old. The Nimrod was considered the first of the Antichrists, if you will, and there will be a final Antichrist. Nimrod tried to take all the power to himself, build a tower that made men feel strong and powerful, that they could never be flooded again, and that they were greater than God. And he clamored for worship. And there's a lot about Nimrod, if you've ever done a study on him and his wife Semiramis, and how some of the imagery that still exists today is all from that narrative of the imagery of Semiramis and Nimrod. And so I'd encourage you to go and do some study on that. But so Dr. Ford, let's pick up on that in the time that we have here. I would like to suggest to you that as we think about a final ruler of the nations, that even the United Nations today, even this board of peace that Donald Trump put together, and even other groups like BRICS that try to assemble what we find are nations clamoring for leadership. And the world seems ripe for the environment right now as there's wars and rumors of wars and financial upheaval and AI that is dominating the landscape, and what a tool the enemy could use that for. We saw that during World War II with the IBM machines and so forth, and the use of being able to track peoples. And we know that Satan ultimately wants to be omnipresent as God is. So what a tool to put into the wrong hands. What a beast of its own. And so the world seems to be primed, ready for this. So prominent world leaders have posed this idea that we need a new world order, and with it, a charismatic leader who can mold the world into harmony and peace. And so often when they say that, it's peace by force. They say peace, peace, and then they immediately go to war to make that peace possible. On August 10th, 2023, Brazil's liberal president said this: a new global government is needed to enforce action on climate change and to make sure everyone complies. Okay, so that wasn't that long ago when those words were said. That same day, it was announced that Ireland's government was introducing anti-prayer zones. This is in quote, where a person can be jailed for praying against abortion or for encouraging people to give birth to their child. So imagine a preacher on the street corner telling them, keep your child, it's formed in the image of God. You could be arrested for that in Ireland in these anti-prayer zones. So it means that they want the altar to Molech to go uninterrupted. They want it to keep burning brightly. And so all the Christians that are outside praying against abortion clinics, they are fighting against the same spirit of Molech that was burning in Israel when God brought judgment on Israel and divided up the tribes of Israel right after Solomon. In his book written in 1973, Willard Cantillon wrote this. It's called, the book is called The Day the Dollar Dies. And he wrote about a number of quotes included in this thesis, if you will, of what the world would look like. He captured a number of quotes from various leaders, and here's what they said. Harold Urey said this: the only escape from total destruction of civilization will be a world government. This is 1973. Robert Oppenheimer stated, in the field of atomic energy, there must be set up a world power. Arthur Compton added this: world government has become inevitable. Dr. Ralph Barton Perry of Harvard said, one world government is in the making. Whether we like it or not, we are moving toward a one world government. Professor Hawking, therefore, the alternative is that we vest all political power in one agency and resign that power ourselves. James Warburg then said, we are living in a perilous period of transition from the era of the fully sovereign nation state to the era of world government. There's a book, Between Two Ages. It was the former assistant of the president of National Security Affairs. Openly, he, in this book, advocated for a one world government as a necessity for the survival of humanity. And such thinking is all part of this diluted influence that continues to grow as a product of the blindness and rebellion of man against God, being blinded by their own natural blindness, if you will, by the deceptions of Satan himself, and even by God's own sovereign judgment. He blinds them. We see this in Ephesians 2, Ephesians 4, and 2 Corinthians 4, and 2 Timothy chapter 2. So undoubtedly, this kind of thinking among world leaders will pave the way for the white horse rider who comes proclaiming peace, but is really the system of the beast in disguise, a precursor to the horrible world conditions that ultimately follow during the time of judgment. Dr. Ford, I think you've probably got 2 Thessalonians there handy. What does that tell us?
I do. And it says, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness.
Yeah. So when you look at, let's examine this here. I mean, when you look to think of the one who would be the Antichrist, he will be this political mastermind, right? I mean, the world's been clamoring for this. Someone who's eloquent, who seems to get it, who says all the right things. You know, I think about right now the mayor of New York City, Mamdani. I mean, he said all the things everybody wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And, he gets me, right? Mm-hmm. He gets my problem, my plight. the cost of living and all these things. Someone is going to fix this. This person is even going to be able to make peace in the Middle East, or at least the illusion of it, according to Daniel chapter 9. When we get we'll get to that point, we'll examine that a little closer. He will even read how he makes a covenant with Israel. So he's going to make it known that he's going to make a covenant with Israel, and this covenant then will enable them to rebuild the temple and will bring this peace in the Middle East that perhaps the world has seemingly not known really since, here's Daniel, we're talking 2,500 years ago. So the world has really never known peace in this particular region of the world, especially when you go all the way back to the brothers of Ishmael and Isaac,
right,
and the battles that have ensued ever since. We will read how he makes covenant with Israel, and some thus have wondered if this Antichrist will be the broker of the peace after the coalition that is led against Israel by Russia, as I mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And with his peace plan will come the illusion of protection, right? So he's going to offer them something that when Israel, what we get the image of in Ezekiel 38 is that they're on their own. They've actually let their guard down. Mm-hmm. So whatever ensues after this battle right now that we're witnessing with Operation Rising Lion and Epic Fury, and whatever comes after that, and I assure you it's not going to be like a 20-day battle. This is something bigger than that. To them, it's like a holy war. This is Iran's attempt to bring forth the Mahdi, the 12th Imam. They are willing to start a world war to bring forth his arrival. So this is something of their eschatology that has distorted their own objectives. They're not looking for Iranian rule over the world. They're looking for the Imam's rule over the world. And they believe that this will usher him in like a portal to bring him in. So once that battle has stopped and perhaps Iran is not the power they once were, this coalition of nations that rise up against Israel will attack them when they seemingly think they're at peace and they're alone. They won't have the United States of America's military power and might with them, and it will be God himself who delivers them. And then they will seek peace once again in the Middle East, and now this Antichrist will rise for just such an occasion. But there's this issue related to the temple, right? The temple is the big issue here. Here's what a recent article from the Jerusalem Post stated. A sheikh in that area, he was a founder of the Islamic movement in Israel. He said it was pointless to talk about what would happen when the Mahdi, the Muslim equivalent of the Messiah, would reveal himself, saying, why are we taking upon ourselves the responsibility to decide such things? Darwish said in a telephone interview that even the Jews believe that it is prohibited to rebuild the temple until the Messiah comes. So what is there to talk about? The Mahdi will decide whether or not to rebuild the temple. If he decides that we should rebuild it, well, I will go out to the Temple Mount and help carry the rocks. Darwish warned against any attempt to rebuild the temple before the coming of the Mahdi. As long as there is a Muslim alive, no Jewish temple will be built on the Temple Mount. The status quo must be maintained, otherwise there will be bloodshed. That was his threat, that no temple can come in as long as there's a Muslim alive who haven't heard directly from the Mahdi, the 12th Imam. If he hasn't given them word to do this, then they won't do it. So they're primed and ready for an Antichrist figure to come on the scene, who to them will be the 12th Imam, to tell them, we're going to rebuild this temple. We're going to allow Israel to rebuild this. It's okay. We're going to do this. And then suddenly they're going to follow his directives. So this Antichrist will do seemingly the impossible. And that's why the next text in verse 20 says he has eyes like the eyes of a man. That's this pompous horn. And it refers to his shrewd but limited vision. We also read that he's quite the public speaker, but his words are pompous and blasphemous. That's exactly the way the book of Revelation describes him in Revelation 13:5. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. As I mentioned already, he arises to power with a platform that perpetuates the illusion of peace. That's what we see the white horse rider go out to do, right? Revelation chapter 6, 1-2. So in the final 7 years, the world will be at war, and the Antichrist will move to crush all opposing forces. And when the seals are open, a quarter of the world will die after the effects of war, famine, and financial woes. Does that not sound like the scene that we're in right now?
Yeah.
We've got famine, war, financial wars. Here in Colorado, we're now dealing with a drought, a dry, warm winter unlike any other on recorded record. I've heard that there is some close proximity to one that happened around 132 years ago.
Wow.
But right now we're looking at the driest conditions that I can ever remember as a resident here in Colorado, which affects 1 in 10 Americans with a water supply that come out of these Rocky Mountains. So it won't take much for God to bring a shift in all the powers of the world to bring this to fruition. Now, I don't believe that we're in Revelation 6, 7 to 8, but there has to be a series of events that unfold before that day arises. And so when the trumpets are blown, another 1/3 of the world will die from war, according to Revelation 9:15. That means in a period of 7 years, more than half the population of the world will die. And nothing this world has built will matter. It will come to an end. It's no wonder that Daniel is greatly disturbed by this final beastly kingdom. But praise be to God. If you're his, if you're part of the kingdom of Jesus Christ, yes, even if you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, what all we talk about thus is that we are to live with the imminent return of Christ ever before us, that there is a glorious hope. This future for the kingdoms of men is not the future for the believer in Jesus Christ. We have a hope assured. We're already victorious in Jesus Christ. So it's not worth the energy looking for who the Antichrist is. Right. Our energies have to be spent on who Jesus Christ is, right? That's why in 2 Peter chapter 3, he tells us, knowing that all these things will be dissolved, knowing that all this is going to come to an end, what manner of persons ought you to be in godliness and holy conduct, in righteousness? That's what we're to put our focus on.
Amen.
You are not to be shaken and caused to give into anxiety in times like these, because the Lord has already numbered how long this Antichrist will even be on the scene. He's going to be given a time, times, and a half a time. That's what Daniel says in Daniel 7:25, a time, times, and a half a time. We're going to get into that more when we look into Daniel chapter 9 in Revelation, because that equals what we say is at times, a time equals 1, times would be 2, that's plural, half a time would be a half, so that's 3.5 years. Now that's very important to note prophetically, because that's all the time he'll have after he breaks peace treaty with Israel, according to Daniel 9:27. In fact, if you look at Daniel 12:7, it says that there shall be a time, times, and a half a time. That's 3.5 years for this great tribulation. In Revelation 11:3, it breaks it down to days. 1,260 days are allotted for him. That's with a prophetic year, which is 360 days. That's 3.5 years. So we'll talk more about this when we get into Daniel 9, 11, and 12. But here we see it in Daniel 7, time, times, and a half. Daniel 12:7, time, times, and a half. Revelation 12:14, time, times, and a half. It's fairly consistent. Then it breaks it down to days. Revelation 11 and 12 say 1,260 days. Then we get into Revelation 11 and 13. It says 42 months. So no matter how you slice it, the Lord has made sure that this Antichrist does not last for very long. And then we'll talk more about what happens to him, because I'll just give you a glimpse. He's cast into the lake of fire with the false prophet to spend eternity with Satan there. So his demise has already been foretold. This Antichrist will be limited in his reign, his time, his duration, his season. God has purposed it. And ultimately, all of this points to the reign of Jesus Christ, our Lord. So, Dr. Ford, I know you've got more for us coming up next week. I keep taking all of your time, brother.
This is awesome.
We've got so much to cover in such a short period of time. Our 25 minutes with you, our listener, goes by so quick. I wish we could have an hour, hour and a half with you.
Yeah.
I hope that you're as encouraged when we go through this study so that you're informed. You have a proper biblical worldview. You know how to navigate the Word of God, to navigate the times and seasons that we're in. And with everything we've talked about, we hope that you're stirred up to be found faithful, that you're not like the foolish bridesmaids of Matthew 25. Rather, your lantern has all the oil of faith that it needs, that you are looking expectantly for the return of Jesus Christ, and you're found doing his work while the time is still now, still day for us to do his work. We want to thank you for listening to Engage in Truth. You can listen to this broadcast and others in the series at calvaryfountain.com. This is a ministry of Calvary Fellowship, Fountain Valley Church. Services are 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Sundays, and we'd love to see you there. God bless you, my friends. Take care.